Hi everyone. I wanted to record a quick video about snowboards and essentially break down some of the key components that I think you should look into when buying a snowboard. Uh, think of this video as an introduction to snowboard building theory, and I'll basically try to break down a few basic characteristics of a snowboard deck, and hopefully by the end of this video you'll be able to tell what are some of the basic differences between different types of snowboards. Yeah, with that, let's get started. So basically, when it comes to a snowboard deck, I think that there are three key components that essentially make up those differences between different snowboard types. And these are the bend of the snowboard, the profile of the snowboard, and the flex of the snowboard. So I have a few decks behind me. Let me bring those out, and this will help us to illustrate some of those key differences when it comes to um, looking at those components. All right, so I just brought out my first snowboard here. Before we go further, I just wanted to say that all my snowboards are made by Burton. I'm not sponsored by them in any way, and this video is not sponsored by Burton, but it's just the brand that I like, and I've always been only riding Burton. Um, but the overall logic about the key components of the snowboard deck obviously applies universally to every brand. But I will be using the Burton decks to showcase those differences. So that's just something for your reference. Anyhow, the first snowboard that I have here is my old Burton 7 snowboard. It's probably about 10 years old, but it will help us to break down the first key component, which is the bend of the snowboard. So, broadly speaking, you could classify snowboards by two types of bend. And for the simplicity of this video, we'll call bend number one the camber bend, and bend number two the rocker bend. So the camber bend, which is this snowboard right here, basically means that the bend goes inside. So if you could see right here, you could see that the bend of the snowboard goes inside. And that's what most people mean when they say that they have a camber band snowboard. We'll talk more about some of the particular different types of camber bands in a little bit. The second type of snowboard band could be broadly classified as a rocker band. And that means that the band of the deck goes outside. So as you can see here, this is my old Burton Sherlock snowboard, and it has a flying V shape, which again basically just means that the band goes outside instead of inside. So this type of band is called the rocker, broadly speaking. And there are also a few different types of rocker band snowboards, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is the profile of the snowboard. And again, broadly speaking, you could classify all snowboards by two types. The snowboard could either be a twin snowboard or a directional snowboard. A twin snowboard, like this Burton 7 here, basically means that the length of the nose and the length of the tail is exactly the same. And the distance from the middle of the snowboard to the tail and to the nose is exactly the same. That's what a twin snowboard pretty much basically means. You can also have a directional snowboard. And basically, what a directional snowboard means is that the typically the nose is going to be longer than the tail. And basically, the distance from the middle of the snowboard to the nose is usually going to be longer than the distance from the middle of the snowboard to the tail. The last key component that I think is very important is the flex of the snowboard. So let me show you an example by illustrating the flex of the snowboard with this Burton Custom X that I have here. And again, broadly speaking, you could split the flex into two groups. The first one is twin flex. The second one is directional flex. A twin flex basically means that the way the snowboard bends in the nose and in the tail is exactly the same. That's literally all that means. Again, that the way the nose bends and the way the tail bends is exactly the same. So this Burton Custom X is a good example of a twin flex snowboard, because basically the way you sort of like lift your tail and your nose feels exactly the same. Now, you can also have something that's called a directional flex. And this is a newer development in snowboard building. I would say probably 10 to 15 years ago, most snowboards used to just be twin shape and have a twin flex. But as the snowboard technology evolves, so does the structure and the characteristics of the deck. And basically, let me illustrate what directional flex means using this Burton flight attendant. Um, and basically what that means is that the way your nose bends is not the same as the way your tail bends. And usually a directional flex snowboard would mean that you could bend your nose a little bit more than you could bend your tail. I know this is a lot of information, and if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's totally fine. Let me sort of like organize all of this together using the snowboards that I have behind me, and hopefully this could help you understand those key components a little bit better. So as I promised, I want to talk a little bit more about each key component of the characteristic a little bit more, starting with the band of the snowboard. So we're back to looking at my old Burton Sherlock snowboard that has a rocker band, and this particular band by Burton is called the Flying V band. And as you could see, it basically like it looks like a V letter, right? So there's like essentially like one band here and then one and two more bands here, right? So like it basically bends like three times, looks like a V. Um, so this is a type of a rocker band, but there are also other types of rocker bands. For example, a flat top band, which basically just your whole board pretty much just looks like a flat top. It has one band outside. So when would you want to have um, a snowboard that has any type of rocker band? In my opinion, those are good if you're just starting to learn snowboarding, because it's just much easier to ride on a rocker band because it's just a lot more forgiving. And also, some people occasionally use like flat top band snowboards in powder. My personal preference is to always ride on camber band snowboards. So I haven't rode on anything that's a rocker band in a very long time. I just prefer the camber. So my knowledge on the rocker band type of snowboards is fairly limited because I prefer the camber. Speaking of camber band snowboards, there are also a few different types there. And to use Burton as an example, they offer three different um, types of camber band snowboards. The first one is just a regular camber band. The second one is the pure pop camber band. And the third one is a directional camber band. So let me show you what each of those sort of like means. So using this Burton 7 that I have here as an example, this is a classic camber band snowboard. And what that means is that you basically just have one inverse um, that goes directly in the middle of the snowboard. So the band is basically right in the middle between the nose and the tail. So that's what a classic cumberband snowboard means. The band is in the middle. Now, there is a similar second type of camber band that Burton makes, which is called the Pure Pop Camber. It is basically a very similar technology, except that those edges here and here would be just a little bit more sort of like noticeable, and apparently it just gives your snowboard a little bit more pop. But the like sort of like the main band still stays in the middle. So it's just the difference of technology when it comes to um, the two edges, you know, at the nose and the tail. I don't own a pure pop camber snowboard, but an example of one would be Burton Process, which is a pure pop twin camber snowboard, or a Burton Instigator, which is a directional twin pure pop camber snowboard. I never personally rode a pure pop camber snowboard before as well, so my knowledge on that type of band is kind of limited. But a few of my friends who own Burton Process are saying that the riding feeling is basically very similar to a traditional camber band. So that's what I've heard so far. Obviously, if any of you own traditional camber band snowboard and or a pure pop camber band snowboard, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your ideas on this. The last type of camber band that I want to talk about is the directional camber band, which Burton also offers a few models with this type of band. I have a Burton Flight Attendant, um, which is a snowboard that has a directional camber band. And basically, what this means is that this sort of like snowboard band um, is shifted from the middle to the tail of the snowboard, right? So if you look at the deck like this, you could see that the band is, well, moved a little bit from the middle. The reason why this is done is because directional camber snowboards are mostly powder snowboards. So by shifting the band towards the tail, you're essentially making it easier for the rider to lift the nose of the snowboard a little bit and float when riding in deeper powder. You would want to get yourself a directional snowboard if you are only riding on one side, because as I said, the nose is much longer than the tail. So any directional board is not meant to be ridden in switch. This is another example of a directional snowboard. This is Burton Custom X. And as mentioned earlier, the tail is shorter than the nose. And you could definitely try and ride switch on a snowboard like this because it has a twin flex. But since the nose is longer than the tail, it is mostly meant to be ridden on one side. So I briefly mentioned the twin flex. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about the last key component, which is the flex. And as mentioned earlier, there are two um, different types of snowboard flex. Um, the first one is the twin flex. The second one is the directional flex. So using this Burton Custom X as an example, it has the twin flex, which means that the way your tail bends is exactly the same as the way your nose bends. And this type of snowboard is very interesting because although it's a directional snowboard, the flex of the snowboard is twin. So technically, that in theory, if you're riding, let's say in a park or just doing a small jump and you want to do, let's say, a 180, you could certainly try and land on the other side, and the board will be riding um, fairly comfortably. But still, the main idea of any directional board is that it is meant to be ridden on just one side. Um, the main reason why I'm bringing this board up is that a twin flex basically gives you a sense like you are riding a twin shaped board, but it's really just because of the flex and not necessarily because of the shape of the board. This type of structure has become increasingly popular in the past 5 to 7 years, where basically the snowboard has a twin flex, which in theory gives you an ability to ride on both sides, but it is made in a directional profile. So at the same time, also um, giving a rider an opportunity to really use the advantage of their main riding position, regular or goofy, as um, as well. The last thing I want to talk about is the directional flex. And again, using this Burton flight attendant as an example, I want to highlight the main reason why I am bringing this board up. And that's because most directional camber band snowboards will also happen to have a directional flex. And again, the whole idea of a directional camber and a directional flex is basically to allow the rider to lift the nose of the snowboard as seamlessly as possible when riding in powder, because it really does make a difference. So that's really what directional flex is all about. Now, I found one snowboard which is sort of like basically seems like an exception to the rule, which is a Burton Hometown Hero snowboard, which some of the Burton pros are riding. And this snowboard is very interesting because it has a directional camber, but it has a twin flex. So I'm not sure exactly how it feels riding that, because to me, um, it feels very logical that if your band is directional camber, your flex will also be directional. But apparently, Burton Hometown Hero doesn't follow this rule and this logic. And I would also love to test that snowboard out and see how it feels. But I haven't done so yet. So if any of you have ridden this snowboard before, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, because I'd love to hear from you. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, to sum all of this up, I just want to talk a little bit more about what type of snowboard you should buy depending on the circumstance, and why. As I said earlier, I don't know that much about the rocker band snowboards because I don't ride those. So my recommendation will solely be based on the camber band snowboards, which is the type of band that I advise everybody to learn how to ride on from the beginning, because it is much harder to ride a camber snowboard, and it's even harder to relearn how to ride a camber band snowboard if you've learned how to ride on rocker. In other words, if you've ridden a rocker band before and you want to learn camber, you're going to struggle a little bit on the mountain, versus if you already know how to ride a camber band snowboard, going and doing a few days on rocker should not be a big problem for you. So to sum up, when would you want to purchase a twin camber snowboard? When I say a twin camber snowboard, it could either be a classic camber or a pure pop camber in twin shape, um, with twin flex. So basically, a few more clarifications here. A twin snowboard will almost certainly have twin flex, and and will almost certainly never have a directional camber. So very likely, if you are buying a twin snowboard, the default characteristics would be either a classic or pure pop camber band, a twin flex, and well, a twin shape. So to me, twin snowboards are great if you are riding switch. Basically, if you're constantly shifting between the two sides and you don't have one preferred method of riding, um, whether you ride regular or goofy and you kind of always ride on both sides, or maybe you do a lot of tricks where you enter the jump on one leg and then you get out of the jump on another leg, then twin snowboard is great. Usually the general recommendation is that twin snowboards are also good for any sort of park and freestyle riding. um, so yeah, that's when you probably would want to get a twin snowboard. For pretty much anybody else, I would say it's probably going to be better to go with a directional snowboard. Um, and as we've established earlier, there's different bands with how a directional snowboard could come. So it could pretty much come in all three different types of camber bands. So it could be a classic camber, pure pop camber, or as this flight attendant is, a directional camber. And it could also either be a twin flex or a directional flex. So let me illustrate using my flight attendant and my Burton Custom X when I would pick one or the other, depending on the situation. So my general rule of thumb is you have to base your decision on two things: the type of terrain you're riding and the type of weather conditions you're riding. So the type of terrain is basically groomed versus non-groomed surface, and the type of weather condition is basically powder versus non-powder. And in this particular case, this snowboard by design was meant to be ridden in non-groomed conditions when there's lots of powder. It will still do well on regular groomers and in non-powder conditions like ice or just, like mush and slush and wet snow, but it specifically excels really well in non-groomed conditions. So like glades, trees, side country, back country, um, when there's lots of powder on the mountain. And the main reason why this board excels so well in these conditions is because of the directional camber and directional flex. So it just makes it much easier to lift your nose and float in powder. On the other hand here, I will choose this Burton Custom X, which is also a directional snowboard, if I'm riding any sort of groomed surface, or maybe something very close to the groomed surface. with non-powder conditions. So maybe it's an icy day, or it just it's kind of like wet snow, or maybe a little bit of slush, and I'm not going any crazy backcountry or side country quests, and not really going um, in the trees too much. Um, this is the type of snowboard that I would prefer. And mainly, the reason for that is that because it has the regular classic camber, and a twin flex. So I find that it's much easier for me to curve on this type of snowboard. So this is pretty much it. I realized that this video is probably going to be a little bit longer than what I originally thought, but I wanted to share as much information about snowboards as possible, and hopefully this is fairly useful. The last two things I want to mention is um, first, the length of the snowboard. And most companies would usually offer you charts based on your height and weight. So you should really consult those, um, and see what works best. What I will tell you is that if, for example, the sizing chart recommends that you ride a 160 centimeter length snowboard for all mountain purposes, then your powder snowboard should be a few centimeters longer than that, and your park snowboard should be a few centimeters shorter than that. So basically, if you're mostly riding freestyle and park, go a little bit shorter from your basic length snowboard recommendation based on the size chart. And if you mostly just ride powder and backcountry, then go a few centimeters longer uh, based on the standard size chart recommendations. The second thing is boots and bindings. Um, Basically, you could break down the boots and bindings by softer boots and bindings and stiffer boots and bindings. And I personally think that it's all really preference. There's no right or wrong approach here, because you could have a very stiff board but very soft boots and bindings, and vice versa. It's all really just trial and error and preference. Me personally, I like my boots and bindings to be softer, um, just because that's something that I prefer. But then a lot of my friends like to ride on very stiff boots and very stiff bindings, because that's something that they like. So I don't have a concrete recommendation when it comes to this stuff, because I think it's just the personal preference through trial and error. Snowboarding is a very um, individual type of sport, so a lot of characteristics that fit to one person might completely not fit to the other person. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, and I hope this video was useful. Thank you very much, and as usual, vibes made.